Well, hi, everybody. I'm Natalia, a co-founder of Wild Woman Wellness, and I'm excited to be here today with my friend Susan Fauman, who I've known since the last century. Susan and I went to college together, and we were both art majors and really good friends. And we've remained friends although these 6 years since we got.
I thought it was like 5.5.
It's 5.5, totally. Susan is an incredible artist. She has spent years as a yoga instructor, herbalist, Ayurvedic practitioner. Do you still have Food, Sex, and Sleep?
I don't. I let go of that.
She had this website for a while called Food, Sex, and Sleep, which was and still is missives on all things food, sex, and sleep. Very important trifecta. And is it 10 years now that you started?
The jewelry business, like 5, almost 6.
Gosh, it feels like.
It feels like longer.
So she's started a jewelry company 5, 6 years ago that is unbelievably gorgeous. And to watch the evolution of it, just the evolution of you as a person and everything that you bring, all the intention, always your interest in science, healing arts, and beauty in the world. And you imbue everything you make with all of that knowledge and history, plus creating lines that are specific for different gems. And I'd like to go into some of that and talk about your knowledge because it's so deep about our relationship with stones and gems. But first, I want to just read a little snippet from susanfauman.com, which I invite you to please go and check it out. Her collection, she just added some new things and they sell out pretty much as soon as you put them up, they're gone.
Kind
So
of true.
it's really true. So here's a little snippet from her bio. It says, "I believe your connection to nature and her rhythms keep you healthy and whole, and that adorning yourself with beautiful reminders of that connection is a celebration of life. My inspirations: ancient sacred geometry, yoga, Ayurveda, the 5 elements, that feeling of rightness in my gut, old things that show their wear, Eva Hesse, Hilma af Klint, Frida Kahlo, Anish Kapoor, Andy Goldsworthy, clouds, water, stone, dirt. The result is unique, bold, feminine adornments which feel ancient and modern at the same time. They are beautiful prayers. They are future relics. What Wonder Woman would wear when she's giving her golden cuffs a rest." So good. And I'm wearing a little bit of this is not exactly representative, but Susan made me this chain and this gorgeous ring years ago, what is the name of this stone?
That's a sapphire, actually.
And I remember needing it at the time.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit how you came to gems or stones and what what is your process in choosing them? I mean, I know this is a multi-level question, but I'm pretty
Oh,
much
it's okay.
ordering
Yeah.
let you
Um, so I would say that primarily my process in choosing is very intuitive and aesthetic. It's very much like what my eye is drawn to, and I've learned over many years to just trust that. Um, I used to question it. I used to try to figure out what was behind it. And sometimes there is something sort of behind it. But I think there's, at this point, I've come to trust that part of what my people come to me for is my eye, that, each of us has a different eye, and different things will call out to us. And I remember, as a kid, my mom would call me into her room before work in the morning and help and ask me to pick out her necklace for the day. My dad would ask me to pick out his tie. Like, it was always, there was something about the way that I see the world that's like certain things just glow a little bit brighter. So that's part of it. And then sometimes what I'll do when I become attracted to a particular gemstone is then go and try to research the some of the why, or at least what might be some of the why.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm also really, really drawn to when you can, as my bio says, when you can see the natural process. So I really love crystals that show the growth pattern on the surface.
Mm.
I love it when gemstone cutters leave the surface raw. I don't do any of my own gemstone cutting. That's a whole nother set of skills, which maybe one day I'll add to my repertoire. But I love actually partly that collaboration between me and the stone cutter and the material itself. Um, so I think what I'm drawn to is partly like it's like almost like a little wink. There's like a little quirk about the material that I'm drawn to. I really love it when a gemstone has an interesting inclusion, when there's like a weird fault,
A fault.
an inclusion. So an inclusion is like a material, another material that's not the actual gemstone itself. So for example, um, like there's a stone called golden rutile quartz. So it's quartz and it has inclusions of these rutiles of another material inside of it. So these like threads of another material inside of it. That wouldn't necessarily be called an inclusion because these days that stone is its own whole category.
Naturally, or is it like genetically modified?
It occurs naturally.
Ah,
Yeah. I mean, there are stones that are lab grown for sure.
mhm.
I used to have really strong feelings against lab grown material, but um, as I've become more intentional about being very environmentally conscious with my stone choices, I still haven't used them myself, but I leave a little more room for the lab grown stuff being a little bit more environmentally sound under certain circumstances. Certain kinds of stones that are lab grown are more kind to the planet. Um, but that's another can of worms.
Yeah,
Right. But it's a thing, and it's one of the considerations.
yeah, definitely. I know that it's something you're really conscious about always in the packaging, and everything that you do is always
Mhm.
environmentally as with the smallest footprint as possible.
Yeah.
And um, I'm just sitting here thinking about, gosh, the thread of all of your work that I think when we became friends, you were working on these tiny little, and I was just looking in my basement for I have it somewhere still, but she had this project in college where you would create with a friend um, a rib cage, and a rib cage was um, symbolic of holding both the heart and the lungs and everything inside. But the way that you created it with a partner, you created so much in collaboration with the natural world and with relationship. So I see this thread going through,
Mhm.
and then of course in your yoga practice. So maybe the question is really for you: what is, when you think about how did I get here? What is the thread for you that
Yeah.
connects all the various parts of your life and career?
Um, I remember pretty early on at Oberlin, uh, getting a little bit caught up in that sort of like angsty dark art making world, that world of like we have to do something that's like a little bit shocking and a little bit pushing buttons. And there's plenty of room for that in the world, but I remember a very conscious choice of I actually really want to make beautiful things. To just I want to increase beauty or not increase it, but at least highlight it and try to like make people's hearts feel a little bit lighter rather than like having to think about heavy things, which and it doesn't have to be shallow. Beauty, I think we have this idea that like beautiful art or beautiful, and then also there's that whole delineation between art and craft, which is
Right.
something you and I have thought a lot about and talked a lot about over the years.
Hmm.
And so uh, I think that's one of the threads, is this like conversation with myself and with the greater community at large, the greater art community at large, about like where is that line between art and craft? Um is jewelry a utilitarian object, or is it an adornment, or is it art that's worn on the body? Um so I think that's one of the threads. I think, but again, also from my bio, like this relationship to natural cycles, to natural rhythms, to what nature produces, and not trying to impose myself too much on that, but trying to make space for it. Sometimes I feel like I'm just creating like a holder or a frame for these natural occurrences, these natural objects.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's this dance, right? Like this dance of figuring out how much of myself to insert into that collaboration, and how much to just kind of step back and let the thing itself be the center of attention.
Hmm. What's been a surprise that people respond to for you? That's something that maybe came from more of that place of just the maker in you, of like, I don't know if people are going to like this, and then they really.
Right. That's a good question. There's a number of things that have been that way. I mean, most of the time I make something and I'm just like, I don't know how it's gonna go. Like, let's see what happens. Um, I think the it's some of the simplest stuff that I've done, like the mismatched tourmaline stud earrings that I do, people will go kind of like those sell out every time and I can't really keep
Mm,
those in stock. I love them. I get why there's something again, so there's something playful about it. So I get that. Um, but I guess honestly, like even though I am at this point now where after building my business over 5 years, where I am at the point where I do sell, I don't sell out every single shop update, but I sell the majority of the work pretty quickly. I'm still surprised every single time. Every single sale that shows up in my inbox, I'm like, really? That piece sold? And it's not so much that I doubt myself or that I doubt the value of the work, but I guess I just feel like I guess I just feel sort of delighted that like,
mm,
that this collaboration is working and that other people are responding to it. And it feels like communication to me. I really love packing up a package and sending it off. It feels like a care package. I finally got had some professional branding done and package design, and it just feels like I just feel so good about how it all comes together and how it's going to open up when somebody
mm.
receives it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it's sort of, I just gonna ask you that, do you imbue, I know when you're working, I'm sure a lot goes through your mind, but the intention of sending this healing object to somebody, um, how is that the same or different from when you would prescribe herbs
Mhm.
or teach a yoga class? Does it feel like you're imparting a similar thing, or is that more, ephemeral
It
than.
feels really similar actually. And what's interesting is part of the reason that I stopped being in love with doing clinical practice as an Ayurvedic herbalist was because people would put too much responsibility in my hands. Like they would show up for their session and I'd be like, okay, great. So these like usually I would say, let's here's a list of 3 things that would be great if you either let go of or added in. Let's pick one. And for this month, let's focus on it. And when you come back, like we'll see what the results of that experiment are. And most of the time people would come back and be like, "Oh yeah, for like a few days I kind of did that thing and then I tried this other thing." And they were like coming back to me without having invested in themselves at all.
Mm,
And um and that's fine. But it's not interesting. It's not interesting for me, right? Like it's not interesting for me and it's also not very effective. Like I felt a little bit like I'm taking their money for no reason.
mm,
And for me, the part of the getting into creating the jewelry was like, it's a little bit more of a collaborative process between me and the customer. And even though I don't do a ton of custom work, I sometimes do, but I don't do that much of it. There's still like people are making a choice. Oh, I need that. I'm tapping into my intuition. And a lot of times people will follow me for ages, never buy something, and then suddenly they're like, that piece, that's my piece.
mm,
And it's just again, they're tuning into something like what I'm tuning into when I'm making the work.
mhm,
um and so it feels really similar in that way. I think as far and in a sense it feels more similar to when I was teaching yoga than when I was practicing Ayurveda, because when you teach yoga, again, you're just kind of like offering something and people take from it what they take and
mm,
make it their own, hopefully. um and there's less of the like feeling of like me having to I don't know, like lay the heavy, like be the sort of the gatekeeper for them. um I make what I want to make. It's an offering and take it or leave it, and that feels cleaner to me, sort of.
mm. Two things I want to know about. How are yoga and Ayurveda still part of your life and practice? And then I also, just for our viewer and Wild Woman Wellness community, Susan's also a mom of an amazing young man. He's 8 now.
He's 9. He
9.
turned 9 in September. Mhm.
Abando. Yeah. So the balance between work and mamahood, definitely. So whichever one feels juicier, you can go to.
Well, I'll start with the yoga stuff because that's sort of easy. um I still am a regular yoga practitioner. Occasionally will teach a class like online or something, not in person these days. As far as Ayurveda goes, it informs me, informs every choice I make. It informs the choices I make for my son. I'm just very conscious of the seasonal cycles and how my diet changes over the course of the year. I still take herbs all the time. I actually have turned my own sort of like healthcare over to an acupuncturist rather than like try to also be my own doctor. It just becomes,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's just stressful.
And I
Um,
people don't know, would you say Ayurveda is sort of the practical medicinal part of yoga?
yeah, I mean, they're totally separate sciences, but people call them the sister sciences. So
Okay.
yeah, so Ayurveda is like a holistic lifestyle, diet, herbal, body care um, system from that also comes from India, and that has a very deep and long history, and that actually informed acupuncture and Chinese medicine very deeply. There was a lot of exchange happening in the Indus Valley,
Mhm.
and so a lot of the principles that are in acupuncture, Chinese medicine, Taoist medicine are like parallel principles
Mm.
in Ayurveda. So that's true, and then also there are a number of festivals and holidays and celebrations within the Hindu calendar that are, sorry, there's a fly bothering me, that are based on natural cycles, that are usually based on the lunar calendar. And there's one in particular that I'm very connected to, called Navaratri, which is a festival celebrating the goddess. And there's actually two of them a year, but the more significant one takes place in the fall. And it is a 10-day celebration and worship of the many forms of the goddess, and follows this particular story of the defeat by the goddess over the demons of ignorance. And so every year I create a collection during that 10 days that is inspired by that festival, and I tell the story on my social media throughout that 10 days. And there's something so juicy about that just like carries over for many months. So still right now, the work that I'm creating, so that happened in September, and the work I'm creating now still is the ripple effect from the collection I created then. And that process of that 10 days is maybe even more spontaneous than usual, because I just really try to respond to the energy of the particular forms of the goddess that are being invoked during that festival.
Mhm.
Um, I love Navratri.
I know
Um,
for people watching, you should definitely check out SusanFauman.com. The story that she let unfold through this social media and through the email it's handed down, through centuries and centuries, and then filtered through her beautiful language. And so it's incredibly inspiring. I loved hearing about that story. I love hearing stories retold and reimagined in a way.
yeah.
So SusanFauman.com, another plug for there. So
Thank you. And then the mama stuff.
the
Yeah.
mama, you're such an amazing mama, and so do
Thank you. I have my moments.
you're, um, but maybe for some advice for our working moms who are also makers.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance, or how do you let yourself off the hook too?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's an ongoing process, first of all. A lot of communication. So part of the trick for us is that I don't want to say I'm a single mom, because the truth is that his dad is extremely involved in his life, and we have 50-50 custody. So it's more like I'm a half-time mom than that I'm a single mom.
Mhm.
And that has its own bittersweet aspect to it. And that took some real getting used to not have my kid under my roof when I went to sleep at night half the time was a painful process. But what it did do, and part of what I was struggling with in our marriage, was that my work was never given the place of priority in our choices, in the choice making that we did as a couple and as a family. We did a lot of, as you know, a lot of moving around for my husband's career. And it just was like I was sort of struggling to rebuild whatever thing I had created each time we made a big move. So we moved from California to the south of France, and then to New York, and then to Canada. And it was just like, yeah, it was a whirlwind. So so being freed from that slash have being made responsible, 100% responsible for my own support, for then buying a house and creating my and growing my business, was super motivating. And it just forced me to get really really honest with my son about what I sort of expected of him in terms of making space for me. Now he's 9, he's not 3. So when I wake up in the morning with him and he needs breakfast, I make him breakfast, but then I say, okay, for the next hour and a half, you're on your own. You got to read, you got to play Legos, whatever. I'm meditating, and you can't disturb me during that time. And he, it started off where he would sometimes interrupt me, or he would suddenly have something he needed to know, or he would make some crazy noise. But I just gently and firmly, this is the expectation. And so at some point, you just have to, I think we sometimes don't expect enough of kids, especially in the West. It's like 9-year-olds in some countries are like the breadwinner for their families. I'm not plugging that. I'm just saying, like, kids are capable of a lot.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I would also say that, like, I involve him in my creative life. He has a workbench next to mine in my studio. So when we can get in there while he's with me, he has his projects that he's working on alongside me. So that's super important. I taught him how to fry an egg and how to make fried rice and how to make ramen for himself, so that if I need him to, then he's capable of that. I think that's super important. I think, letting yourself off the hook. I think we have this tendency as moms, especially sort of conscious, connected moms, to kind of martyr ourselves. And so we kind of have to look at our motivations for why we're feeling compelled to do something, and whether, and make some compromises. We don't do a lot of screen time at our house, so that's not the big compromise we make, but we do audiobooks. And so he'll listen to an audiobook for 2 hours and play Legos while I'm doing something. And that's actually been something we implemented from the time he was about 4, that he would start listening to audiobooks. And it's, it's age appropriate, of course, but I think, and I like, for me, that felt that like a better compromise than putting him in front of a screen, because he has to engage in a different way with his imagination. And
helpful for parents to hear, I'm sure, that it's, especially with distance learning. I know that Mila's still going to school, so.
Yeah, he's distance learning though. He's remote.
Sure. Yeah. But,
yeah, he, like, I think kids, it's okay to use the supports that we have available to make our lives easier. And just be wise about the choices we make. It doesn't have to be a screen. It can be he uses my old iPad that doesn't barely work except for play audiobooks.
So thank you so much for all this time and amazing, inspirational time with you. It's I want more. I always want more. And I'm gonna let you go, but I want to just see if you would impart a practice for our viewer, either with a gem or not, but maybe something, imbuing an object with an intention. Is there a specific ritual that you could lead us through?
Oh, a ritual. I mean,
a sort of something that you would do with a sacred object, whether it's a gem or not, but or maybe there's I should just ask you, is there a quick 3-minute sort of meditative practice you could take us through with even something you already have? I
mean, I would actually, the one that comes to mind is a sort of a decision-making meditation. And and that doesn't really require any kind of object. There are definitely, like, at some point we could have another talk about crystals that are specific to specific things, and the 5 elements, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I think, let's start with what we've got in our bodies, and that's our heart and our breath. So let's go ahead and close our eyes and just take a few moments to feel the ground beneath you. Maybe it's the seat you're seated on, or your feet against the floor. And take a couple deep breaths so that you're really sending the breath down into your belly. Maybe that's by itself going to be a huge connection point. And then I call to mind a decision or even a conflict or something that you're holding right now that you're having a hard time knowing which way to go. And then I want you to imagine, you can actually physically do this, but you can also just do it in your imaginings, a circle in front of you on the ground. And I want you to imagine that you're walking along one arc of that circle to the other side. So starting from where you are, walking to the left around the arc of the circle. And as you're walking, I want you to imagine one of the possibilities that this decision could lead to. So imagine that you've made one choice and you're waking up the next day and you're living that choice. And pay attention to the sensations in your body. Pay attention to the lightness or the heaviness, the sense of expansiveness or contractedness. And complete that circle and come back to where you started. And don't worry too much if you're like, I don't really know what I'm feeling. Just trust the process and trust that after you've done it a few times, you'll be able to connect more deeply. So then come back to where you started, and now we're going to envision having made the opposite choice or the other option. And again, walking in a circle, this time walking around the right side arc of the circle, back all the way around and back towards where you started. And again, feeling that out, waking up into that choice. Heavy, light, expansive, contracted, soft, hard, feeling these literal just sensations in your body. Tingling, sense of aliveness or a sense of dullness. You come back to center or back to the base. And then finally, if there is a sort of third option or an in-between option, I'd like you to now call that to mind and try walking straight down the center of the circle. And again, feel into your body's experience, expression. And then coming back to your base. Take another couple of deep breaths. And just maybe repeat to yourself a couple of times which direction felt right, and plant it as a seed. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I just want to say that, we have a lot of guilt in this culture, particularly for women, around doing what we want to do and having that be selfish, have the idea that that's selfish to do what we want to do. But the truth is, like, as crooked and twisty and turny as your path may be, it is your path. And taking detours by trying to trust what somebody else thinks is the right thing for you to do at any given time is only going to lead to more circuitous coming back to where you started and trying to get back around again. Turns into a mess. So the only way that you are going to develop your intuition, develop your sense of rightness, that rightness in your gut that I talk about in my bio, is by maybe even making mistakes, but by making choices, standing behind them, doing what you want to do, and trusting that ultimately what you want to do is grow and blossom and connect more to divinity, to connect more to nature, however you want to say that. And that the wanting that's in you for a particular choice is about that. It's about connecting, finding your way to that. And it's, any other way is just going to sort of squash down that burgeoning desire, that little flame that's starting to take shape. So I'll get off my soapbox, but
Stay on it, sister. Thank you so much. I love you so much.
Love you too.
Powerful healing. You're such an amazing, beautiful force in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise.
You are bringing this world. Thank you for sharing it with
I
us.
love you.
I love you too.
Talk to you soon, okay?
Yeah. Bye.